Hi there. Yesterday I had a really interesting conversation with two atheists and two Christians, and I'm the third Christian, so the atheists were outnumbered, but nonetheless it was very interesting. And so right here you can see a couple of the people I was chatting with. So you see up in the far right corner G-Man. You'll see down under him Kenneth, Leonard, and to his left Ethan. Ethan is the Your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. And not on a camera, but you'll hear his voice, is Vekl. And so Vekl and G-Man are very powerful Black voices in the community. We also have a couple of white guys here. So we've got a little bit of a dichotomy with respect to skin color. Just for fun, we like to mix it up. And of course, I'm the only female here in the group, so that also makes things a little more interesting. So we had a group of varying opinions. And so somehow we made our way into the Black Lives Matter movement conversation. And this is where it got interesting. So I'm going to get us into this talk, and here's how we sort of moved into it, and it was unintentional. The movement was we started talking about our differing political views. And G-Man and Vekl are Christians, as I mentioned before. They tend to be more on the moderate to maybe leaning a little bit to the conservative side. And then we have the Ken and Ethan are kind of in the way of maybe more to the left, seems like that. So we'll get a little bit into that. And then we're going to talk about their views on Black Lives Matter. And it gets a little bit heated. So you get some popcorn, it's going to be kind of interesting, but we're also going to try to fact check some of the things that they say. So here we go.
I believe that as a Black man, I think I've
That's Vekl speaking, just to let you know.
always held some conservative views, but I've been hoodwinked and programmed to vote Democrat for so many years. And, you know, we can go into a whole historical discussion about how that came to be. But I today, since I guess I've always been kind of conservative at heart, but didn't really know what that meant. But now I hold an even more so now today since 2012 because of Obama's policies and his ideas and stuff like that. And even back then, I wasn't really politically minded until 2015, till late 2015. But prior to that, I was definitely against Obama's policies, so on and so forth.
I want to point out one other thing that brings us together. So Ethan and Ken and I are all three from Chicago. I'm originally from Chicago. I live down in Florida and I've been down here for decades. But those two are still up in Chicago. And so we're going to talk a little bit about things going on in Chicago. G-Man and Vekl are from the Northeast. I believe G-Man's around New Jersey. I think Vekl's in New York. So we'll keep going just to get that perspective, because we're also going to talk about some of the issues again with Black Lives Matter.
I saw him as a non-Christian person. His policies were against Christianity, against a lot of people's morals, moral views. And of course, now today, you know, if people don't know already now, I do support Trump. I voted for him 2016. I'll vote for him again. And yeah, that's where I am right now. I don't know if that question, but go ahead.
Yeah, so when I went to high school, and right around the time when I graduated, I would say I graduated in 94, so I was up until 1999, I think I was Democratic in my thinking. You know what I mean? When I became a Christian in 2000, I was still Democratic, but I would say around 2002, 2003, I embraced the Republican form of thinking. And since 2008, I don't really trust the Democrats or the Republicans. That doesn't mean I want a third party. I think that the government lies, and it doesn't matter if a person's a Democrat, or Republican, independent. It doesn't matter if they're a communist. It doesn't matter if they're a socialist. It doesn't matter what they are. They all lie. So as a Christian, to be blunt, I'm just waiting for Christ to return, because I know when he returns, that's when things are going to be run properly. The way our government is presently structured, whoever has the most money is pretty much going to run the place. You know what I mean? All these rich corporations are lobbying for this to be done and for this to be done, and a little person like me is the one that is suffering. So again, I'm just waiting for Jesus to return, because his policies are the best, in my opinion.
Okay. See, I think this is interesting. What about Ken?
Real quick.
So, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go please.
I'm actually a federal employee, so I have to kind of tiptoe around politics a little bit. I can't speak toward any specific candidates or endorse anybody, kind of a thing. But I tend to lean left. I think that it's a good idea to provide assistance to people in low-income communities and to protect entitlements like Social Security. I'm in favor of things like increasing the minimum wage, improving unemployment benefits, making sure that people can join unions if they want to, having equal pay for equal work regardless of sex or gender. So these things all would make me a liberal today. Or if you take us back to the 1950s, that would make me an Eisenhower Republican. So, I don't know what I am, but I tend to lean left in today's climate.
Interesting. See, I just find this really fascinating. That's what I wanted to get into, because I feel like it seems like if you're more religious or Christian right here in this group, you're leaning a little more to the right. And if to the other end, you're leaning a little bit more to the left. Does that seem fair?
Statistically, that seems to be the case. I know I did a little online exam, a little survey that I think is free for anybody can do it. It takes only maybe 2 minutes to do. And it said that I'm more centrist left, according to the thing. I said, let me do this again. And I did it twice and the same result came up. So I have some ideas that seem that I think a lot of liberals would agree with. So I don't know. It's really strange.
Vekl spoke to
about Black Lives Matter. So, can we talk about Black Lives Matter? Because I would love to get my opinion about that.
So real quick, I have to jump off video, but if you give me like 3 to 4 minutes, I can jump back on audio only. Would that be okay?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, sure.
I would be interested to hear your opinion on Black Lives Matter. We haven't talked about that.
Do not get me started on that group.
Oh, yeah. I don't support it.
Just to point out on Ethan's view, Ethan said he started out a little bit on the conservative side and he sort of moved to the left after he became an atheist. So he was raised in a family with Christian beliefs and also Muslim beliefs, just like G-Man. G-Man also was raised in a family with Muslim father and Christian mother. And so G-Man went the way of Christianity. Ethan was brought up in Christian faith and then kind of went the way of atheism. And Ken, I actually am not completely sure of Ken's background, but we're going to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter now. And as you just heard, Vekl is pretty fired up about this topic. So we've got a couple of black men who are going to give their opinion on Black Lives Matter. At this point, I have no idea what their opinion is. So I thought to myself, oh boy, what are we opening up here? Because this could be a very tense topic. As any of you know, there's a cancel culture out there. There are many people who are very concerned about what you say, to the point actually of tragedy. There unfortunately have been people who've died basically because they've said all lives matter. So if you make that claim right now in this sort of hot charged political environment, you could be running a big risk, even with your jobs. There's people who have been losing their jobs, people who have been losing their lives. This is a very hot button political issue. And so you kind of have to tread lightly on this kind of topic, but you also want to be honest about exactly what's going on. So we're going to get a little bit into what does it mean to say you're part of Black Lives Matter? What is this organization? Did it start out the same way as it is today? So for example, it's my understanding the organization that's called blacklivesmatter.org started 4 years ago. And it started with women who were Marxists and they call themselves trained Marxists. So we have a couple of women doing that and I can support that in just a second with a recent article by the New York Post from June. So I've got a support for that. Came out with a 2015 video. And so we'll take a look at that. But beyond that, we're also going to just be curious about what G-Man and Vekl's views are, because of course, let me go back to something that occurred not too long ago with George Floyd in Minnesota. As you probably are aware, which just about pretty much everyone is aware, unless you're living in a cave right now, there was a black man up in Minnesota, and unfortunately we saw a really brutal case of police brutality. We saw that George Floyd was suffocated because the policeman had his knee on George's neck and George couldn't breathe, and he kept complaining that he couldn't breathe. He said 8 times he couldn't breathe. And unfortunately, the policeman continued to squash his neck, and then finally George ended up dying. And that sparked many protests around the United States. And that sparked something where people felt we could come together as Americans. Everyone gets on board with saying, we don't want to see police brutality. We don't want to see police brutality where it seems like it's singling out people in different communities, like the black community. We definitely can all get on board with that. Nobody wants to see that. But then something kind of crazy happened within a week or so, is the blacklivesmatter.org group kind of got connected in there. And the next thing you know, there are these movements in Seattle, like the CHOP movement, where a bunch of people decided they were going to form their own little area in the middle of Seattle. So we have these sorts of movements spurring up. And we also have, unfortunately, with those kind of movements, a lot of rioting. So we had another example of tragedy occurred in Atlanta, for example, sparked a big riot. And since then, way too many people have died after the fact. So we have some unfortunate situations like what happened in Minnesota, George Floyd, but that was followed up, unfortunately, by many innocent people dying. And some of the places where these innocent deaths have occurred include Chicago, which is where Ethan and Ken and I originate. Those two are still up there. And it includes places like New York and Seattle and Portland and Atlanta. So we're seeing it in St. Louis. We're seeing this all over the country of some tragedies that have occurred. We also see it in Tampa, where I'm from. So here we go. Let's listen to what these two black men, two white men, and a white woman, we all walk into a bar. Let's see what happens next. It's probably very fortunate that we're not sitting here with alcohol in front of us in this kind of a conversation, because it could get heated. Just warning you. About that.
Do not get me started on that group.
Oh yeah, I don't support it.
It's perfect having two black men to tell me what because I of course think black lives do matter. I mean, that's like a given, and I hate police brutality. That's also a given.
Do not get me started. I'm warning you. I'm warning you. Do not get me started. You're gonna have a lot of people hating you on this channel, SJ, if I open my mouth about that group.
Well, I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so I don't support Black Lives Matter. I definitely believe that police brutality against African Americans need to stop, okay? And I believe that we need to have equal rights here in the United States. Totally understand and totally get that. However, in my opinion, Black Lives Matter is nothing more than a Trojan horse to try to force everybody to stop offending everybody, which is impossible. There's never going to be a time in history where we're going to be able to not offend nobody. Like, for example, with Black Lives Matter, they want to take down these white images of Jesus. Oh, we got to stop offending black people. You know what I mean? Let's take down, what is it? The Confederate flag. Let's take this down. Let's take this down. Stop offending black people in this country. Well, that's going to apply also to Muslims. That's going to apply to Buddhists. That's going to apply to New Agers. That's going to apply to atheists. That's going to apply to everybody out there. Pretty soon, all you're going to have is a bunch of houses with no designs on it or nothing like that, because everything offends everybody. You know what I mean? And there's a Trojan horse to get everybody to accept a particular lifestyle, and that's not going to happen. I believe Black Lives Matter isn't really what it says it is. I believe that it's just meant to be a Trojan horse to get us to accept certain things that we are never going to accept.
That's interesting. That's very interesting you have that view. I was curious to know, because I haven't been bringing that up because I didn't know where everybody stands. So, and I know it's a hot button political issue right now, to say the least.
Let's be honest, SJ. You didn't want to bring it up because you're a white person and you're afraid that some silly, limp-wristed white liberal who just hates themselves and feel that they have all this kind of white privilege is going to try to accuse you of being a racist, all because you choose to speak on this issue, even though we know that you're not a racist. But the problem is we got a lot of people on the left, especially with this cancel culture now, who just want to jump at any given opportunity to accuse somebody of being a racist or an Uncle Tom like myself, or G-Man, just because we speak the truth about these things. Okay, is there racism in this country? Yes. Is there racism in this world? Yes, but there's no systemic racism like we saw prior to the 60s or prior to that. Okay, we don't see that anymore. But see, what they want to do now is they want to shove this down everybody's throat. White people can't say the word black without being accused of being a racist. Okay, for crying out loud, even back in 2016, there was an article about a group called PETA, I think it was, and they wanted to try to make everybody believe that milk by itself, just milk, is a symbol of white supremacy. So if you're a white person and you're caught going to Walmart buying a jug of milk, it's probably because you are a white supremacist. And I'm not joking. I'm dead serious. There was an article about this. It popped up twice, as a matter of fact, under this, well, of course, conveniently under this current administration. So everybody on the left, mostly people on the left, I haven't seen it done on the right, but I'm sure there might be. But it's mostly done on the left. Everybody's got to lift the race card, both black and white, doesn't matter. Okay? You can't say this, you can't do that anymore because of something you said 10 or 15 years ago. Now all of a sudden you're a pedophile, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're Islamophobe, xenophobe, you're all this kind of ist. And the people that are being attacked the most, I don't care who has a problem with what I'm about to say right now. You got a problem, come in here and have a discussion with me. But right now, it seems to me that the people that are having the most persecution right now are white men.
So who are Black Lives Matter? Here's the Black Lives Matter website. Actually, it's blacklivesmatter.com. Let me replace what I said with .org. 4 years ago, what is known as the Black Lives Matter Global Network began to organize. It started out as a chapter-based, member-led organization whose mission was to build local power and to intervene when violence was inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. Sounds good so far. In the years since, we're committed to struggling together and to imagining and creating a world free of anti-Blackness, where every Black person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive. Okay, just to mention what Vekl was alluding to, in 1964, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was passed. Civil Rights Act was passed. And that prohibited discrimination in the workforce based on race, religion, color, national origin, or sex. Recently, that was amended just past June by the Supreme Court in the United States to also include the categories of the trans group. So the LGBTQ community is also protected now under Title VII, so they are free from discrimination based on those particular protected group categorizations. So we're on board here, and of course they're pointing to some pretty awful things that have occurred in the past, like Trayvon Martin, some other issues, Mike Brown. We've got a lot of different things at Ferguson. So they're pointing out a lot of the challenges we've had over the past few years that have mobilized this particular group. So they say right here, they acknowledge, respect, and celebrate differences and commonalities. Still, we're on board with this. It all sounds pretty good so far. So let's see, let's keep going. We intentionally build and nurture a beloved community that is bonded together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting. We are unapologetically Black in our positioning. In affirming that Black Lives Matter, we need not qualify our position. Okay, well that's still, we're pretty much on board here. We are guided by the fact that all Black Lives Matter, regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status, or location. We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege. Wait a second. You got my attention right there. Okay, I'm considered cisgender. I didn't know what that actually meant until a few years ago. That refers to the straight community. And apparently we have privilege. Now, I was not aware that the cisgender community has privilege, but it actually benefits families when there are two parents at home. Okay, so this is why I'm mentioning this. As we go down a little bit farther, we're going to see something going on here. It says, we make our spaces family friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so they can mother in private and even participate in public justice work. Okay, this is the part that it gets sketchy. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. Notice the suspicious absence of the word fathers here. All right, so what's going on in the Black community in the United States? Well, about 65% of the families right now don't have fathers at home. In many cases, they're impoverished, they're in the inner cities, and a very large number of those families, there aren't fathers at home. There's a culture right now that's sort of encouraging this idea of not bothering to get married when you have children. And so unfortunately, we're seeing a cycle that's a vicious cycle because, again, the mother, in a lot of cases, if she doesn't have the help of a father, the mother would be home trying to raise the kids, but also trying to figure out how to bring in an income when you have little kids at home. So it's a very difficult situation. It's not something you want to perpetuate. Now, they're saying here that it's a village. That's great. A village is wonderful. However, I think it might not be a bad idea to also support the patriarchy and say that we'd like to see the dads come home, get married, take care of your women, take care of your kids. That's what we want to see. That's what Vekl and G-Men also want to see. They've pointed to that before. So let's go back and see some more of what Vekl, G-Man, Ken, and Ethan have to say. But on our way there, let's take a quick stop and look at what the New York Post just said in June 2020. Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors said in a newly surfaced video from 2015 that she and her fellow organizers are trained Marxists, making clear their movement's ideological foundation, according to her report. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. Okay, we are trained Marxists. We're super versed on sort of ideological theories. And I think, and I'm just reading parts of this paper, I think sort of what we really tried to do is build a movement that could be utilized by many, many Black folk. Okay, so they're Marxists. So pay attention to Ken's response here when he sees Vekl point out that the white men are impacted by this to a great extent. And actually, I have to say, Vekl's onto something there. There is, when people, it's funny when I teach human resource management, I teach at the college level, I teach that class and I teach the laws, I teach Title VII that I just mentioned. And one of the things that's interesting is I actually have to include on my test whether or not white men are protected under Title VII, because a lot of people actually make the assumption that only minorities and women are protected under Title VII. But of course it protects all groups, even white men. So it even protects the majority group. And so sometimes people don't realize that. So let's go.
White.
Oh, and before I say that, I do want to point out something that is also the elephant in the closet here. Of course, there has been systemic racism in the past, okay? And there certainly was it between 1620 and 1863 in the United States. We had horrific racism. We had slavery. We had people who were treated as if they were subhuman, lots and lots of beatings. If people escaped, they were dragged back, often killed. People were often killed for trying to help people in the Underground Railroad. We had a real tragedy back in the United States between those years. And even after that, because even after 1863, up until 1964, Black people did not have any sort of legal protections. And so they were devoid of many rights. They were redlined in many places. So they weren't allowed to live in a lot of different communities. We had segregation going on in the schools. So meaning that there were places for white people, places for Black people. Black people oftentimes weren't allowed to share the bathrooms in different parts of the country. And we still actually, really sadly, you still do see little bits and pieces of that. We still have racist people. He's just saying it's not systemic. Our laws aren't systemically applied so that they're going to hurt people in different groups. But we do definitely have examples still today of people who act in racist ways. And if you're wondering if I'm actually telling the truth on that, all you have to do is go surf eeoc.gov and look up discrimination cases in the workplace. Because even though we have the laws, unfortunately, we also have law breakers and people who are toxic out there. We're still working on that as a family. But that's why I think so many people did get on board with Black Lives Matter right up front with George Floyd, because we watch that and we say, no, 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 this is wrong. But anyway, let's get back here.
White men are heavily criticized and attacked by people on the left. White men can't say anything. They can't have an opinion. They can't say
So does it look like Ken might want to say something? Sorry to interrupt here.
anything. They can't speak. Why? Because we got some silly limp-wristed white liberal and some whiny Black liberal who's just going to cry and lift up the race card every time a white person, particularly white straight men, has something to say. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry, man. I got
Actually, okay, I'll be honest. I agree with you on all of this. So I agree with you. I feel like it's gone. I feel like the initial movement, I feel like a bunch of other people jumped in there who actually have Marxist beliefs. The women who are running blacklivesmatter.com are Marxists. They put it on their website. They didn't put it on their website. They put it in videos in 2015 that was out in the New York Post. And they said they're not just Marxists, they're trained Marxists. And so they have an agenda that goes way beyond what I think the everyday Black person or white person even realizes. Okay, so we're on to that right now. So we continue this conversation.
And to prove this, I watched a YouTube video where I watched a woman talk about what Caucasian or Europeans have brought to the table in terms of like politics, inventions, and things like that. And I was finding myself getting offended. How dare this person talk about how they invented this and how they did that? And I was the one with the problem, not them, because they didn't say anything that was actually wrong. There was nothing wrong with them remembering their leaders. If we can remember Martin Luther King, then Caucasians should be able to remember their inspirational leaders. If we can sit there and remember our time during the civil rights movement, then Caucasian people should be able to remember the time that they struggled and how they were liberated from certain things. You know what I mean? So this whole Black Lives Matter is just baloney and stupid. You know what I mean? And it's just used, as I said before, as a Trojan horse to try to get us to accept things that I am not going to accept, and I don't care what you call it. You know what I mean? So I just want to stop there because I know Kenneth is going to be talking forever when his turn comes.
I got a lot more to say.
I promise. I don't know. I'm not going to talk forever. It's weird because we're talking on something like Black Lives Matter. I look like I was built in the lab in Germany in like 1938. So I'm like the last person anybody wants to hear talking about Black Lives Matter. But
Why is that?
It's just.
Why is that? Because you're uneducated or because you're white?
Because it's not my movement necessarily. You know what I'm saying? Like the thing is, in our country, we've look. I didn't interrupt you when you were speaking.
I'm sorry, Ken. I won't interrupt you, but I just wanted to point out real quick.
I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm just going to interrupt.
What you're doing is you're proving my point, though. But go ahead.
Maybe I'm not. You may have to wait and hear what I have to say before you jump to that conclusion.
You already did. Go ahead.
So the white folks have had the mic for an awful long time in the United States. I don't think that there's any objection that any reasonable person would have to anybody else grabbing the mic and speaking their mind about issues affecting their communities. If somebody wants to say Black Lives Matter, I don't see that as being a controversial thing to say at all. I think there's a problem where an organization and a larger movement sometimes get conflated with one another. I don't know enough about Black Lives Matter as an organization to speak on it or have much of an opinion. But I can say, living here in Chicago, and I live in Chicago proper, I'm not out in the suburbs. It seems to me that Black Lives Matter has been an extremely positive thing.
Positive. Let's see. Here's a headline here that says, "Do Black Lives Matter in Chicago?" It's an opinion. I'm not being facetious. I asked the question, do Black Lives Matter in Chicago? Last weekend, CBS 2 in Chicago reported that from 5 p.m. Friday to 5 a.m. Monday, there were more than 100 people shot, at least 13 were killed. 12 of these shooting victims were children and 5 perished. We do not know the demographic breakdown of this weekend's victims, but we do know the African Americans accounted for roughly 81% of Chicago's homicide victims in 2019 and 79% in 2018. So the bottom line is it's an interesting conversation that we have when we involve people of differing demographics. And so you just witnessed a few different opinions coming from both Christians and atheists and white and blacks and female and male. So we have a variety going on right there. And I think that the common denominator, though, is we want to see things like care, fairness. We want to make sure that all communities are protected. We want to make sure that the policemen are protecting people. We want to make sure, obviously, that people who are in the minority groups are absolutely protected and our communities are free from violence. And I think we can all get on board with that sort of thing. And of course, we also would stand together arm in arm for justice. Thank you so much. I hope that you'll like, subscribe, and please do choose to come again.